To limit the number of cards playable in the current format for both balancing and money concerns, Pokemon has a standard rotation, which rotates out older sets to make room for the new ones and new strategies and cards. But how do you know if your card is valid for a standard format? Foreign language cards are not legal at standard events, though it depends on your country of origin, what kind of cards you can have in your deck, and how many. The condition of cards can also affect legality. If you can tell through a sleeve what card is which, it is not legal since it is a marked card and easy to tell apart from other cards in your deck. The main way to tell if your card is legal though is through the letter marking down here. These letter markings are relatively new in the Pokemon TCG, and if you go to the News tab you can see which letters are currently legal. However, just because it doesn't have a letter doesn't mean you can't play it legally. Pokemon has a tendency to print cards called evergreens because they're always printed for the new block. Ultra Ball, Switch, and Rare Candy are ever constant in the format, so older versions are also legal. Sometimes Pokemon will straight up print older cards, and if the wording matches exactly, or if the old card receives an errata, you can play it. For example, this electric is basically the same as the old one because of one word difference, and the decision not to errata the original card means you can't play it in standard. However, this old Super Rod, which has been errated from a shuffle in 3 to shuffle up to 3, can be played. The only other requirements for a standard deck you should be aware of is that decks contain 60 cards and have a max of 4 cards with the same name, excluding basic energy. Flip a coin. Whoever wins the coin flip can call first or second. Then shuffle your deck and draw 7 cards. Look for a basic Pokemon to put in the active spot. If you do not have a basic Pokemon, reveal your hand to your opponent and shuffle it back into your deck. Repeat this until you have a basic Pokemon in your hand. Put a basic Pokemon face down in the active and up to 5 basic Pokemon on the bench. Set up 6 prize cards face down. Draw any number of mulligans you'd like, keeping in mind that mulligans cancel each other out. Start the game by flipping over any Pokemon you have placed. Draw for turn. For the person going first, they cannot play supporter cards or attack. During your turn, you may play as many item cards as you like, but may only attach 1 energy, play 1 supporter, and play 1 stadium. Any Pokemon you put into play cannot evolve the same turn you played it. Your turn ends when you attack or pass. It always happens. You have cards in hand to play, but you don't know what order to play them. To play those cards in the right order, known as sequencing in the Pokemon TCG, you need to ask yourself, what cards do I want the most this turn? Then you look at your hand and decide which cards will find which resources. From there, it's about playing cards in the order that maximizes your chances of finding your specific cards you want. For instance, early game, you may have a Pokegear and you want to find Arven ASAP. In order to make that Pokegear more effective, you can burn item cards like Earthen Vessel, Buddy Poffin, Ultra Ball, and other search options such as Arzon to increase your odds of hitting that specific supporter. In the mid to late game, in order to set up another attacker after you've been KO'd, things may get a little trickier with sequencing. Maybe you're looking for both a Pokemon and energy attachment for turn, and you only have 3 cards in your hand, plus a Pheasantipity on bench. What should you start with? Well, number 1 should always be a resource check. If you have a free option to check your deck, consider taking it unless you specifically know the order of your deck is to your advantage. Knowing specifically what is in your deck via checking the deck itself or your discard pile and board state is invaluable when making decisions at the start of your turn, especially when it's coming to the end game. From there, you can decide what your next play will be based on the information you now know. I would always start with guaranteed free draw offered by abilities such as Flip the Script, since more cards is more information and options to play with. From there, it's your standard burn cards to up your chances on finding the specific cards you want. It's easy to see an item card, energy card, or a stadium card in your hand and you immediately want to play it. And yeah, most of the time that's fine, and is the intended way to play the game. But there are certain times when saving that burnable will pay out more later. Let's start with your first turn. If you're going first and you have a Pokegear 3.0 in your hand, don't play it. You're typically not playing a supporter turn 1, and while your hand could potentially get disrupted, keep in mind that if you did play that Pokegear, you now have just officially wasted a late game out to a boss, and it's probably the least effective time to play that card. There's also the fact that just saving the Pokegear for one more turn basically turns it into an 8-card search for a supporter, since your top deck is an additional card for dig. Other situations where not playing that burnable may save your booty is if the card itself increases your odds of finding an endgame win con. For example, not playing Fighting Gong from your hand that is full of all your basic fighting Pokemon and fighting energy. If a fighting energy for the late game is crucial, saving that card, especially when your deck is around 10 cards or less and you're holding most of your endgame resources in your hand, can increase the number of outs for that specific win con when disrupted. There's other situations where not playing cards from your hand is also beneficial. Saving stadium cards in hand to wait until your opponent plays a stadium to guarantee a win in a stadium war is one such case. When playing into control style matchups, learning how to play only what you absolutely need to and saving resources in hand is an important rule of thumb. Hyper-aggressive digging decks such as Chevrolet EX also need to know when to let off the gas and save crucial resources while still advancing their game plan, or chance decking themselves out in the late game or not having the resources they need to clutch the victory in the end. While saving your items to play later can be quite a high-level play, there are instances where you need to play as many items at once in order to prepare for item lock. Item lock comes and goes from the Pokemon TCG. The most memorable time for item lock has to be during 2015, where Seismitoad EX dominated a format that was very control-based. Currently, Badoo and Jellicent EX are the main afflictors of item lock you are most likely to run into in the current standard format. Badoo is used as a one-of in many decks that need additional time to set up their board in order to control the pace of the game in their favor. If you know you're playing into a deck with an item lock option, play whatever items you think are necessary to help set up your deck. Building your deck around item lock is an important additional step. Stock standard draw cards like Lily's Determination are invaluable and already mainstay in decks, but other ways to get your Pokemon energy into play with Stadium's tools or supporters is a good way to build resilience into your deck. However, the best answer to fighting item lock has to be any Pokemon-based draw or search, which will help you navigate the early game and hopefully help you avoid any pesky item cards which you cannot play. Just be grateful you don't have to play around item and ability lock, am I right? What should you be telling your opponent in the Pokemon TCG? Here are several key things you must tell your opponent when asked. First of all, whenever you are grabbing a card that fulfills a specific requirement, you must tell your opponent and show what you're grabbing so they know if you grabbed a valid card. If your opponent asks to see your discard pile, you must show them, since discard piles, and while we're at it, lost zones are both public information, which is why these piles are played with their cards facing upwards. If your opponent wants to know your hand size, tell them. It's pretty common courtesy in card games to tell your opponent public information when asked. The same goes for whenever you shuffle back in cards or retrieve cards from your discard pile to hand. Yes, your opponent could memorize your entire discard pile and look at it again to see what you took out, but it is public information and much easier for everyone to tell what you took out. The one exception to telling your opponent what you grabbed is when you play a card that searches your deck for any card. Since it doesn't have to fill any specific requirement other than being a specific number of cards, you don't have to reveal exactly what you grabbed to your opponent. Special energies have some of the most confusing wording of all time. For instance, though this says it's a lightning energy, looks like a lightning energy, and tastes like lightning energy, it is, in fact, only a lightning energy when attached to a Pokemon, meaning cards like Volkner and Dynamotor Electric, yes, even the old one, cannot grab Speed Lightning energy from the deck or discard pile since it's technically not a lightning energy until it's on a Pokemon. And well, that also applies to all of these other special energies as well. And let's not forget about the strangest interaction of all, the multi-typed energies. Oh, how I hate that the wording on these cards are clear and unclear. Let's look at Okidogi to explain just a little bit of how these cards work. Okidogi has the powerful ability Adrena Power, which, when it has a dark energy attached to it, gets 100 more HP and does 100 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. Yet, if you attached one Rainbow and one Fighting to Okidogi, it can attack for 170 damage and has 230 HP. Why? Well, rainbow energies like Luminous, Prism, and Legacy energy are a blend of every single type of energy at once, but only fulfills one single energy attachment for attacking, meaning that with one energy you can have both a fighting and a dark attached to Okidogi, activating its ability, but you'll still need a second fighting energy attached to be able to attack. The only reason you wouldn't is if you're attacking with a counter energy attached, which provides 2 rainbow energies when you are behind on prizes. And while the pesky wording has existed since basically the dawn of the Pokemon TCG, we certainly missed out on the clarity that Crystal Energy provided, which states that it provides 1 energy of all types of basic energy, which I feel is slightly more clear. Anyways, what is your most frustrating interaction with special energies? Be sure to let me know in the comment section and I'll have you know that. What makes a Pokemon meta in the Pokemon TCG? Well, it has to be pretty good. And what makes a Pokemon deck good? A few factors come to mind. It's consistent, it's simple, and it does a good amount of damage. Let's take a look at Goldingo EX as an example. Its strategy is extremely simple. Set up wide and use Genesect EX to get your evolutions out. Then get as many energies into your hand to do big number and KO opponent. Its ability is built in consistency, and the strategy, while it takes some practice, is pretty foolproof. Because of its uncapped damage potential and consistent deck strategy, this deck is a large portion of the meta. But sometimes, decks that lack some of those key factors will still be very popular in the meta. Some decks are built around playing in the late game and lack early damage. Other decks aim to out-resource their opponents or slow down their opponent's game until they are ready to start taking prizes. Other times, decks are incredibly fast, but lack a bit on the damage front, which reminds me of Golisopod GX and the upcoming Mega Lopunny. These faster decks aim to be more consistent and hit harder earlier than your opponent. They can struggle against well-developed boards. And if you just hate what everyone else is playing, sometimes there's decks that have an ability or attack-based lock. And these decks are called anti-meta and are only good if people forget to play around them. But in general, the easiest, most straightforward strategies, which also have consistency baked into the Pokemon lines, tend to float to the top as the best decks in the meta. What's your favorite deck? Is it a meta deck? Be sure to let me know down below, and